who sell cars for a living in France. But you know who it really, really sucks for? It really sucks for Tesla. Because while car sales in France are down by 6%, sales of Teslas in France are down by 63%. Not 6%, but 63%. Ooh, I wonder why that is. France is the second largest market for electric cars in all of Europe. So that's really bad for Tesla, down 63%. The only country in Europe that is a larger market than France is Germany. In Germany, Tesla sales are down 59%. In Sweden, Tesla sales are down 44%. In Norway, Tesla sales are down 38%. In the Netherlands, Tesla sales are down 42%. Weird, right? I wonder why that is. Here on this side of the Atlantic, new polling from The Economist and YouGov looks at how Americans feel about the CEO of Tesla, and specifically his involvement in the U.S. government now after he spent so much money to get Donald Trump elected to the presidency. Economist and YouGov took two polls, one right after the election and another one this week, now that Trump's been in office for a couple of weeks. And look at this. Among Republican voters specifically, the proportion of people who wanted Elon Musk to have, quote, a lot of influence in the U.S. government, since the election, it has plummeted by 21 points. We're now down to only about 1 in 4 Republicans wants Elon Musk to have a lot of involvement in the U.S. government. That has just dropped like a stone in a very quick period of time. Among all other Americans who aren't Republicans, the proportion of Americans who like the idea of Elon Musk having a lot of influence in the government, that proportion among Americans who are Democrats is 6%. The proportion among Americans who are independents is 6%. 6%? I mean, he's polling at like tooth decay levels, right? That's like funny bone banged into something sharp levels. Yesterday, around noontime, it was 15 degrees in Waterville, Maine, and it was breezy. It's 2 degrees Fahrenheit with the wind chill. But you know what? Temperatures like that, that's nothing for the good, hardy people of the state of Maine, a number of whom felt inspired, even in that weather, to go down to one of the busiest intersections in Waterville, Maine, to go hold a bunch of signs and demonstrate at the Tesla charging station in their town. The Waterville Morning Sentinel reported on the protest, including at least one local resident who saw the protest when she was driving by. She pulled over, parked, jumped out of her car, and decided to join them. Around the same time that was happening up in Maine, down in D.C. at the Department of Labor, this was happening. A short notice protest, and kind of a big one, at the U.S. Department of Labor at their headquarters building. Now, you might remember yesterday, there was a lot of competition for your attention if you were interested in protesting. There were protests in all 50 states, all around the country, including really big ones at places like the Texas State Capitol and Sacramento, California. Yesterday, even just in D.C., there was also a big protest in Washington, just outside the Capitol, for foreign aid and to stand up for USAID. But in addition to all of that, there was also this one at the Labor Department. And again, this one was scrambled together on really short notice, and it was scrambled together on short notice specifically because Elon Musk was coming. People who work at the Labor Department and people who support them and who wanted to stand up for them flooded down to the Labor Department to head off Elon Musk when they got word that Mr. Musk and his little band of teenage flying monkeys that he's been bringing around from government agency to government agency, ripping out the guts of the computer systems. When people found out that they were on their way next to the Francis Perkins building, to the Labor Department headquarters yesterday in Washington, people just ran down there, turned out in force, in person, on no notice, to go try to stop them. Now, this is interesting. We don't know for sure if it was that, Musk and his gang pulled up at the Francis Perkins building and saw the crowd outside. We don't know if it was some other reason, but that reported next stop on Elon Musk's itinerary yesterday afternoon did not happen. It appears that that protest turned Musk and his little group of guys, turned him around. And they did not get into the Labor Department systems yesterday, even though they were scheduled to be there. At the same time that was happening, Democracy Forward went to court and filed a lawsuit to block Elon Musk and his freshman 15 from accessing data and systems at the Department of Labor. So we had sort of a 1-2 punch yesterday. You had the physical, direct action of people turning up for that protest at the Labor Department, which appears to have sort of physically turned Elon Musk back, along with his folks. But you also had a court order produced by that lawsuit later that afternoon, which kept them legally blocked from getting into the Labor Department as well. So the Labor Department appears thus far to have escaped what they've been able to do to lots of other agencies. And they appear to have escaped that fate thus far by defending themselves. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, this is what's called making yourself a hard target, right? Making yourself as annoying as possible to go after. You know, in the great in the great proverbial circle of life here, don't be a mouse or a vole. Be a porcupine. Be a poison frog. Be something that sticks in somebody's craw if they try to get you in their mouth. You know what else got blocked today? The resign or else threat from the Trump administration to millions of people who work for the federal government. The administration and this weird and wildly unpopular effort led by his top campaign donor, they've been crowing about how using this gambit, they were going to intimidate 200,000 people who work for the government into quitting by tonight, right? It's going to be by midnight tonight. They were going to get 200,000 people to voluntarily leave the government by being intimidated by this resignation demand. This gambit from the Trump administration and Elon Musk, among other things, appears to be quite illegal, in addition to just sort of clearly being a scam. And I say it appears to be a scam because of what we've had reported, for example, from how people in various government agencies have been briefed about how it will work. One example comes from the Department of Education earlier this week. They had a briefing on this resign or else threat. And at that briefing, employees were advised that if they took this offer and they resigned, as Trump and Musk are demanding they must, if they took this offer and resigned as of midnight tonight, and then thereafter, the Trump administration reneged on their part of the deal and just stopped paying people what they told them they'd get, employees at the Department of Education were told at that point they would have no recourse. They would, quote, waive all legal claims. One person who was part of that briefing at the Education Department told NBC News, quote, it sounded like a commercial for a used car dealership, like, act now, one day only. Yeah, and hope you don't want to resell that used car if it's a Tesla, because that market is tanked. Whew, doesn't look like it's coming back either. But the resign or else deadline for people who work for the government, that deadline was supposed to be tonight at midnight. It's now not, because that too has been blocked by a federal judge. A key component of that threat from Trump and Musk was this apparently unenforceable promise that if people quit because of this demand, they'd be paid their salary anyway for several months. That promise itself appears to be illegal, pretty plainly, under federal law, because the government can't promise to spend money that it does not have allocated for that purpose. Well, it does, as I say, appear pretty plainly to be illegal, but now a federal judge will test it while the whole stunt is legally blocked. You know what else got blocked today? Another one. Again, this was Trump's day one declaration that he is canceling the constitutional provision that says if you're born here, you're an American. Today, again, we got yet another judge blocking that gambit by Trump. This was a judge appointed by Ronald Reagan. who was just blistering in his ruling and about what Trump is trying to do here. Quote, the rule of law is, according to him, meaning according to Trump, something to navigate around or simply ignore, whether that be for political or personal gain. The judge said in his ruling, quote, there are moments in the world's history where people look back and ask, where were the lawyers? Where were the judges? In these moments, the rule of law becomes especially vulnerable. I refuse to let that beacon go dark today. Again, a federal judge appointed by Ronald Reagan. He's been on the bench for decades, and with those sort of stirring words today, he ordered Trump's birthright citizenship gambit blocked. You know what else got blocked today? The Trump and Musk gambit that turned out these thousands of people at the Treasury building this week to protest. The news that Trump had let his top campaign donor inexplicably access the payment system at the U.S. Treasury that sends out everything from your Social Security check to your tax refund to everything else the government pays for. That news in particular had caused pretty understandable and pretty widespread freakout in this country. First, among Treasury employees, including the acting Treasury Secretary, somebody who's been employed at the Treasury Department for decades, who's a career, nonpartisan civil servant. He tried to stop them from getting their hands on this payment system, and then he resigned when he couldn't stop them. But it caused a big freakout inside Treasury. It also caused a significant freakout among members of Congress. It also caused a significant freakout among members of the public. We know that in part because members of Congress have been telling the press this week that as the numbers of phone calls to House and Senate offices have skyrocketed over this past 2 weeks, with people complaining about Trump's actions and demanding that their members of Congress and their senators stand up and do whatever they can to stop Trump. A significant proportion of the calls they've been getting, according to members of Congress, are, quote, panicked calls from regular Americans, specifically about this thing at Treasury, about the payment system at Treasury being handed over to Elon Musk's little unsupervised playgroup. And this was made worse, frankly, when Trump's newly confirmed Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, assured everybody repeatedly that the access that he had allowed Elon Musk and his team to this particularly sensitive payment system at the Treasury, he assured everybody that their access to the system was read-only, meaning that they weren't even trying to use their access to the system to cut off any payments of any kind. They'd never even had that in mind. Well, despite those assurances from Scott Bessent, reporting in the Washington Post and in the New York Times and in the Associated Press and elsewhere would now seem to indicate that Scott Bessent was either lying or wrong when he gave everybody those assurances that their access was, quote, read-only. In fact, according to this recent reporting, from the very outset, from their very first demands to get access to that incredibly sensitive system that partisan actors have never before had access to, Elon Musk's people made clear that the reason they wanted access to that system was specifically because they intended to use it to stop funds from going out. On their own say-so. Funds they thought shouldn't go. So we're starting to get a sense, 2.5 weeks into this new Trump term, about the fact that pushback definitely works, but the different forms that pushback can take. So, like in this case with the Treasury payment system, we get direct action. We get a big, impressive, basically impromptu protest organized on very short notice at the Treasury. We get Treasury officials doing what they can to stop what they're trying to do and then sounding the alarm about why they resigned when they weren't able to stop it. We get regular Americans calling their members of Congress and blowing their stacks about this. We then get Democratic members of Congress blowing their stacks and going to the protest and calling press conferences and demanding answers from the administration. We get the press blowing up, the press doing reporting and blowing up this calm down, nothing to see here, apparent set of lies from the administration about what, in fact, they have been up to with this scheme at Treasury. All these different forms of pushback. And now, hello, as of today, we get a federal judge throwing down a court order and blocking them from doing anything inside the Treasury payment system. Pushback works. But pushback also has a lot of different ways that it can work. And here's one that I think has pretty unpredictable implications in the days ahead. Because in the midst of that drama today over this Treasury payment system, we also got this delightful advance in this story from the Wall Street Journal, which exclusively reported that the actual kid, the actual person who Donald Trump and Elon Musk had let into the Treasury payment system, the actual person is this person. Quote, a key Doge staff member who gained access to the Treasury Department's central payment system resigned today after he was linked to a deleted social media account that advocated racism and eugenics. A 25-year-old who is part of a cadre of Elon Musk lieutenants deployed by Doge to scrutinize federal spending resigned after the Wall Street Journal asked the White House about his connection to the account. The account posted in July, quote, just for the record, I was racist before it was cool. The account wrote on Twitter in September, quote, you could not pay me to marry outside of my ethnicity. In reference to a post noting the prevalence of people from India in Silicon Valley, the account wrote, again in September, quote, normalize Indian hate. After the Wall Street Journal inquired about the account, White House spokesperson Caroline Leavitt said that the young man had resigned from his role. Again, this is one of the Elon Musk lieutenants, one of his, bad news bears, who specifically was allowed access to the most sensitive payment system in the entire U.S. government, the one that sends out more than 90% of all payments for all things from the United States Treasury. This was that specific kid. And here's my favorite part of this reporting from the Wall Street Journal. After this, the Wall Street Journal uncovers what this kid has said. I was racist before it was cool. You could not pay me to marry outside my ethnicity. Normalize Indian hate. After the Wall Street Journal turns up that stuff from this kid, the Journal then does, there's then an interview, with Bloomberg, in which Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, quote, defended the work of Doge employees appended to the Treasury Department, describing them as, quote, highly trained professionals. That's why he gave them access to the most sensitive payment system in the entire U.S. government that partisan political actors have never had access to before in the history of this country. It's because he checked. They're highly trained professionals. Normalize Indian hate. At Wired tonight, we learn about another of Elon Musk's JV team, these highly trained professionals that are very trusted by the U.S. Treasury Secretary. This is from Wired.com tonight, quote, a young technologist known online as Big Balls, who works for Elon Musk's so-called Department of Government Efficiency, Doge, has access to sensitive U.S. government systems. Highly trained professionals. However, his professional and online history call into question whether he would pass the background check typically required to obtain security clearances, according to security experts who spoke with Wired. Quote, one of the companies he founded, which is called Tesla.Sexy LLC, controls dozens of web domains, including at least 2 that are registered in Russia. One of those domains, which is still active, offers a service called Healthy, which is an AI bot for Discord servers targeting the Russian market. Someone using a Telegram handle linked to the young man also solicited a cyber attack for hire service in 2022. At Path Network, the young man worked as a systems engineer. Path has at times listed as employees Eric Taylor, also known as Cosmo the God, a well-known former cybercriminal and member of the hacker group UG Nazis, as well as Matthew Flannery, an Australian convicted hacker whom police allege was a member of the hacker group Lulzsec. So these are These are the highly trained professionals. That was the exact phrase from Trump Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. This is the team that he's decided it's totally fine to give them complete access to the highest security systems in the whole U.S. government, including the ones that have your social security number, your personal identifying information, your bank account information, potentially your health information. They're highly trained professionals. Why wouldn't they be given everything? CNN reports tonight, quote, a 23-year-old representative from Elon Musk's Doge was granted access to the Energy Department's IT system yesterday by Energy Secretary Chris Wright. This despite objections from people in the Department of Energy, which controls access to information about U.S. nuclear weapons. I don't know if you worry about nuclear weapons. I don't know. I don't know if you worry about the safety of your social security number and your bank account. I mean, everybody has their own, things that keep them up at night, right? Do you ever worry about, air traffic control? Our nation's new transportation secretary, who until a few weeks ago was a weekend host on the Fox Business Channel, he announced today that this crew, operated by Elon Musk, this is the group to whom he's handing over the national system that we have in the United States for air traffic control. He's letting them, quote, plug in to the system to fix it. Because who among us doesn't feel better about having a 19-year-old with links to Russia and famous criminal hackers who goes by the online handle Big Balls in charge of American air traffic control? Anybody want to buy a used Tesla? Today in Washington, people protested against USAID cuts and specifically against cuts for the PEPFAR program that has literally kept tens of millions of people alive with HIV treatment. These folks blocked traffic in Washington, D.C. They told Secretary of State Marco Rubio to reverse the halt to PEPFAR, reverse the halt to this program. Now, Marco Rubio has tried to say that this particular program isn't being halted, but it absolutely is. Activists and journalists have proven that out, even as Marco Rubio and the Trump administration have tried to say that this is one of the programs they're going to let live. This program is halted. And whether it is intentional by them or whether it is because they cannot tell which direction they are walking on an escalator and they can't figure out how to restart something they accidentally stopped, it is now down to activists in the street who are using everything they've got to get that program restarted, including risking arrest today and stopping traffic in the streets. It also includes a somewhat random overture from a billionaire. Billionaire Microsoft founder Bill Gates was at the White House yesterday afternoon lobbying President Trump personally and White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles personally to restart that program and to save USAID. All different forms of pressure to try to push them back. And so is the new federal lawsuit that we can report is being filed tonight to stop the Trump administration from illegally closing USAID. The Congressional Research Service reported earlier this week that there is not a legal means available to Donald Trump to shut that agency down, with or without Elon Musk and his band of juvenile delinquents trying to do it. But they are nevertheless trying. And so now we see with USAID and foreign aid and everything else, we see everybody else who understands the stakes here pushing back in every way, on every front, every day. This fight is joined, and we're going to get some expert advice on the prospects for success next. So one of the things we've been talking about on the show here for several days, and particularly tonight, is all the different things that are coming together to block what Trump is trying to do, through the courts, through direct action, people protesting, through exposés in the press, but even as, for example, Elon Musk's teenage demolition crew has been blocked tonight from the Treasury Department by one set of tactics, and been blocked from the Labor Department by another set of tactics. They have been able to get through other places. They have, for example, gotten into the Department of Education, where they have reportedly obtained access to personal and, we believe, financial information on every person who's got a freaking federal student loan in this country, which is millions of people. They've also gotten into the Office of Personnel Management. Here's the Washington Post on the seriousness of that today. Quote, agents of billionaire Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, have gained access to highly restricted government records on millions of federal employees, including Treasury and State Department officials in sensitive security positions. The records maintained by the Office of Personnel Management amount to a repository of sensitive information about employees of most federal agencies, including addresses, demographic profiles, salary details, disciplinary histories. Two OPM officials said the level of access granted to DOGE agents means they could copy the social security numbers, phone numbers, and whole personnel files for millions of federal employees. Quote, they could put a new file in someone's record. They could modify an existing record. They could delete that record out of the database. They could export all that data about people who are currently or formerly employed by the government. They could export it to some non-government server or to their own PC or to a Google Drive. Or they could send it to a foreign country. One cybersecurity expert tells the Post, quote, it's highly likely they are improperly accessing, transferring, and storing highly sensitive data outside the environments in which it was intended to be contained. Quote, if I were a nation like China, Russia, or Iran, I'd be having a field day with a bunch of college kids running around with sensitive federal government data on unencrypted hard drives. So the president's top campaign donor and his little gang of interns have been blocked from some places, but they are still getting into lots of others. I should also point out, even where court orders have been issued stopping some of the things that the Trump administration is trying to do, we're not totally clear those orders are being followed. Quote, not quote, two federal judges have now issued several orders, for example, directing the White House to rescind the spending freeze that Trump implemented as soon as he took office. Even though that spending freeze legally is off, they can't do it. Nevertheless, there are multiple reports around the country of federally funded preschools and federally funded medical centers and federally funded infrastructure projects that still aren't being funded and that are starting to shut down, even though they have been ordered by a court to restart those funds. Big picture here, the thing I am worried about is that it is starting to feel like an afterthought or like a footnote, that all this stuff appears not to just be bad and dangerous and damaging and unpopular, but patently illegal. If it is illegal, isn't it supposed to be stoppable? David Super is an administrative law professor at Georgetown Law School. He told the Washington Post this week, quote, so many of these things are so wildly illegal that I think they're playing a quantity game. And assuming the system cannot react to all this illegality all at once. If that is what's happening here, what do we do about it? Joining us now is David Super, administrative law professor at Georgetown. Professor Super, thank you so much for being with us. I appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
Your diagnosis of the problem is unsettling. Does it come with a prescription?
That people need to keep bringing these things to the courts, that the agencies that are being defunded need to pass that along, that federal employees that are aware of data breaches need to pass that along, and that this does need to be raised with the courts.
Do you think the courts are capable of handling these things at speed to stop damage as it's being done? For example, the Office of Personnel Management personnel files for the federal government, that's a very, very, very damaging data breach. When you think about potential foreign adversaries, you think about the potential for all sorts of criminal or otherwise improper use of that material. Obviously, the courts have not been able to get in there quickly enough to stop that from happening. They may have acted quickly enough to, for example, save files at the Department of Labor. What should we understand about the court system and its ability to move with alacrity when necessary for the safety of the country?
Courts generally assume that the other branches of government are acting responsibly and show them deference. In this case, Mr. Musk has shown that he doesn't deserve any deference, and I hope the courts will start acting much more quickly and be more willing to presume that where there is smoke, there's fire. Data breaches are a problem because once they happen quickly, they can't be undone. Funding freezes and getting rid of valuable federal employees is a little bit easier to correct, but they're certainly hoping that the courts will get fatigued. I hope that's not true.
Let me ask you about one particular example. President Trump today says he is going to fire, he's going to lay off basically all of the 10,000 workers at USAID. There's also reporting today that tomorrow he may announce that he's laying off thousands of people at the Department of Health and Human Services. We have tonight just filed a new lawsuit by federal workers and foreign service unions asking the judge to halt the dismantling of USAID, let alone all of those firings. What do you make of the prospects for these things in terms of stopping the short-term actions of the president, but also in the long term, whether or not he'll be enjoined from doing these things that we all thought would be illegal?
Oh, they're openly illegal. The very first Congress of the United States decided what departments we would have. They debated that. George Washington didn't set up the State Department. Congress did. There are statutes creating all of these agencies that Mr. Trump says he's going to get rid of. He simply doesn't have the power to repeal those statutes. And I think the courts will recognize that. Most of these things they're doing aren't even plausibly legal. The question is going to ultimately come down to the Supreme Court and whether they're willing to give up their legacy and buy these completely preposterous legal theories. I don't think they are.
Given that, Professor Super, is there anything legally, just as a matter of tactics, that should be done right now that hasn't yet been done?
No, I think people are doing a very good job. I've been impressed with it. The AID lawsuit says exactly the right things, that President Trump is trying to repeal a law which he has no power to repeal. These are decisions made by Congress, and that he is being utterly arbitrary in taking these actions and has no grounds to do that. I think this litigation is going well, but a lot of damage is going to get done until ultimately the Supreme Court